of Orthodox spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy.
Hello, dear listeners. We are continuing to read from the book With Pain and Love for Contemporary Man, the first volume in the series Spiritual Counsels by Saint Paisios. The secular spirit in the spiritual life. Yeroda, sometimes you say of a person that he sees things through a European lens and not through the Eastern spirit. What do you mean by that? I mean that he sees things with European eyes, with European logic, without faith in human terms. And what is the Eastern spirit? The dayspring from the East has visited us from on high. A verse from the Hesychasterion of Christmas. Which is to say, when I say that someone has caught the Eastern spirit and abandoned the European, I mean that he has left behind logic, rationalism, and has instead taken hold of simplicity and piety, because that is the Orthodox spirit within which Christ rests, simplicity and piety. Today, even spiritual people are often lacking in simplicity, the sacred simplicity that comforts the soul. If we do not renounce the secular spirit and do not adapt to the simple way, in other words, if we do not stop being preoccupied with how others see us or with what they say about us, we will never experience kinship with God and the saints. But for this to happen, we need to move to the spiritual realm. The more we live with simplicity, especially in a cenobium, the fewer the bumps from our passions, and the smoother we become. Otherwise, we end up creating a fake person. This is why we must always strive to get rid of the secular carnival and become angels. Do you know the difference between people who live worldly lives and those who live spiritually? Those who follow the world try hard to keep their yards clean, but seem not to mind that their houses are full of trash. So they sweep their yards clean and throw the trash inside. They think, people can only see what is in my yard. They cannot see what is in my house. In other words, it's fine to have rubbish inside, but not outside. All they want is to be admired by everyone. By contrast, spiritual people care about having the interior of their houses clean. They are not interested in what people will say or think, because Christ lives in their houses and in their hearts, not in their yards. Sometimes, however, even spiritual people live in a superficial, secular way, or to be more exact, in the manner of the Pharisees. Instead of being concerned about how they will go to paradise, how they will get closer to God, they care about making a good impression in this life. Instead of experiencing paradise in their life, they are robbing themselves of all spiritual joys. They remain earthly people. Thus, they strive to live a spiritual life in a secular manner, but inside they are empty. God is not present in their heart. Unfortunately, the secular spirit has had a great impact on spiritual people as well. If even spiritual people act and think in a secular way, What is to happen with those who live secular lives? When I asked some spiritual people to help drug-addicted youths, their answer was, if we tried to establish a home for drug addicts, no one will donate his property to us. This is why we are building a retirement home. I am not saying that retirement homes are not needed. Of course they are. But if we start thinking this way, these institutions will not be charitable institutions. They will be sinkable institutions. People do not understand that worldly success is spiritual failure. The secular spirit in monasticism. Yeroda, many people tell us you are living in paradise. You should pray not to lose the other paradise. I would be greatly comforted if secular people were impressed by your spiritual development without you noticing it, something that you would owe to your spiritual progress. Spiritual progress should not be a goal that you pursue, but a natural change that slowly takes place inside you. Try not to lose yourselves in useless things, and in the end lose Christ. As much as you can, try to acquire the monastic conscience. Live spiritually as nuns should. If you do not forget Christ, He will not forget you. I do not mean to upset you, but to help and support you. Try to detect the secular spirit. When this spirit creeps into monastic life, it saddens Christ. Reject this spirit as something totally alien. Unfortunately, the secular spirit has now entered many monasteries because some fathers today promote the monastic life through a secular channel, in a secular spirit, and do not lead souls to the patristic spirit of grace. I detect an anti-patristic spirit prevailing in many monasteries today. They do not accept what is truly good, the tradition of the fathers of the Church. Rather than live in a patristic manner, they use obedience and the breaking of the will to raise the spiritual life to the ground, and to serve their own secular desires and self-will. Thus, they cannot progress in the spiritual life because they have made this temptation, that is, the secular spirit, a partner in their cenobitic life. We have no right to interpret the commandments of God as we please. Neither do we have the right to present monasticism any way we want. It is different when we stray because of human weakness and then realize our mistake and humbly ask for God's mercy. What is worse in my view is that some people consider this secular spirit a sign of progress. In fact, they should consider the secular spirit a stumbling block and reject it at once in order to be cleansed spiritually and receive the Holy Spirit. For it is the Holy Spirit who sanctifies, enlightens, and sustains our souls. Then there are those who say, we must showcase our civilization. What kind of civilization are we supposed to showcase? Our secular civilization? The natural thing for us who live the monastic life is to show others our spiritual civilization, spiritual progress. Where is this spiritual progress? We should not aim to surpass secular people with our own secular achievements. This kind of progress harms and torments even those who live in the world, let alone those of us who live in monasteries. We should run so fast spiritually that lay people will be forced to speed up and do something. If all we do is behave like a very spiritual lay person, we will not be of any help to those who live in the world, because they already have examples of lay people who are highly accomplished in that regard. Our task is to surpass them. A monastic's goal should not be to exhibit his worldly achievements. This is an insult to monasticism. A monastic who thinks in a worldly way has taken the wrong path. While he has set out to find Christ, his soul has remained in the world. When we measure progress by worldly standards, we drive monasticism to spiritual disintegration. Nowadays, so many things are disappearing from monasticism, just as they are disappearing from the world. For example, honor and respect are hard to find. People often refer to them as outmoded values. This is why I feel so much pain. At times, I feel as if I am going to explode. I want to take to the mountains. People who have not experienced something higher are not that worried about the spiritual life that they live according to their own matter. But do you know how painful it is to live this way for those who have experienced something higher? If Christ had made me worthy to live the kind of monastic life that I really desire and to die bravely in the process, I would have looked upon it as if I had died on the front line. It is worthy for someone to die, to give himself over to make a confession of faith, to sacrifice his life so that the Holy Fathers are not blasphemed. Don't we think even a bit about the Holy Fathers whom we study all the time? Why don't we reflect on where and how they lived their lives? The Lord said, "The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath nowhere to lay his head." Matthew 8, verse 20, Luke 9, verse 58. Tremendous, and you see how ascetics tried to imitate Christ in those caves. They experienced Christ's joy because they emulated Christ in everything. All their attention was focused on that. The Holy Fathers took to the desert and turned it into a spiritual state. Today we are turning it into a secular state. While the Church of Christ is departing to the desert in order to be saved, we are converting the desert into a secular city, scandalizing people and depriving them of the help they need. We leave them with nothing firm to hold on to. This is the great danger that I see in these difficult times in which we live. Today, it is even more important for us to live in a truly monastic way so that we may be granted divine strength. But instead, the secular spirit has changed us and made us weaker. In other words, we banish our spirit and are left with an empty corpse. Today, there are monks who live the monastic life only in appearance. They do not smoke, they live a chaste life. They read the Philokalia, and they constantly talk on the works of the Fathers. The Philokalia is a collection of texts written between the 4th and 15th century by the Holy Neptic Fathers of the Orthodox Church, known for their practice and teaching of watchfulness and the guarding of the intellect and prayer. The Philokalia was compiled in the 18th century by the Greek monks St. Nicodemus the Iorite and St. Macarius of Corinth. They are not different from lay people who as children did not lie, always made the sign of the cross, went to church, and later as adults were careful with moral matters and thought that what they were doing was sufficient. Well, that's what is happening in some monasteries today, and many lay people find it attractive. But as they come to know those monks and nuns better, they realize that they are full of the secular spirit and do not differ from people who live in the world. At least if monastics smoked, read newspapers, and talked politics, people would consider them worldly and avoid them. This way monasticism would not be harmed. Monasticism would not be secularized. How can a monk move the heart of a lay person when the monk himself is spiritually drained? Alcohol will lose its acrid odor if we leave the bottle open. It will not kill germs anymore or ignite if we light it. And if we put it in a lamp, it will ruin the wick. It's the same thing with a monk. If he is not careful, he will drive divine grace away and will be left in the end only with his monastic habit. He will be like the alcohol that has lost its sting. He will not be able to cauterize the devil. Angels are a light for monks, and monks are a light for men. He will not even be a light to others. Do you realize how destructive this secular spirit is? If true spirituality leaves monasticism, there will be nothing left. When salt has lost its taste, it is good for nothing. Garbage will at least turn into fertilizer, but salt will not. If you put it on a plant, it will burn it. Ours is a time when monasticism should shine. It is in these rotten times that we need the salt. The greatest contribution to society will be made by monasteries that do not have the secular mindset and have reached a spiritual state. Monastics there will not need to say much or do anything else, because they will be able to speak through their way of life. This is what the world needs today. Have you seen what happened to the Catholics? I remember years ago, when I was at the Stomian Monastery in Konica, someone brought me an article from a newspaper. It said, 300 nuns protested for not being allowed to watch movies and for having to wear their habits at full length and not up to the knee. I found it outrageous, and I wondered, why then did you become nuns? The article said that eventually they got rid of their habits. Given the way they were thinking, they had already thrown them away. Another time I saw a Catholic nun who did not differ at all from a lay woman. She was supposedly performing missionary work, but looked no different from those very secular young women involved in various charities. We should not allow this European spirit to come into our lives. We should never reach this point. Yeroda, I find it so difficult to get rid of the secular way of thinking. It is not difficult. It requires vigilance. You should constantly think of what Saint Arsenios the Great used to say to himself. Arsenios, why have you left the world? We forget why we came to the monastery. Everyone makes the right start, but later they run into trouble because they forget why they entered the monastery. Yeroda, you said that the secular spirit is entering monasticism, and the spiritual way of facing things is disappearing. Will the true spirit of monasticism survive? This is just a storm. God will not allow the disappearance of true monasticism to happen. Yeroda, I had this thought. Are there still monasteries that follow the spiritual path? Of course there are. Otherwise we would see Panagia herself come and put us all in jail. There are monks who quietly lead very spiritual lives. They can be found in every monastery, in every metropolis, everywhere. It is these rare, solitary souls who move God to tolerate the rest of us. The secular spirit is a disease. The most important thing today is that we not yield to this worldly spirit. To resist is a way of bearing witness, a way of martyrdom. We should try, as much as we can, not to be led astray by this current which will sweep us downstream in this channel. Smart fish don't bite the hook. They see the bait, recognize it for what it is, and escape. Other fish see the bait, rush to eat it, and just like that they are hooked. This is how the world sets the bait and catches so many souls. People are attracted to the secular spirit, and they end up hooked by it. The secular spirit is a disease. All of us want to avoid disease. We must do the same with the secular spirit. Avoid it no matter where we are. If we want to grow spiritually, we must become strangers to worldly ideas of progress. This is how we will become spiritually healthy and experience angelic joy. Chapter 4. Injustice is a great sin. Injustice draws the wrath of God. It is so important to have God's blessing. It's such a great fortune. What God blesses will stand firm. It will not crumble. Whatever is not blessed will fall apart. Injustice is a great sin. Even though all other sins have some extenuating circumstances, injustice has none. Injustice draws the wrath of God. It is a terrible thing. Those who commit injustice are setting their heads on fire. From one side we see them commit injustice, and from the other we see their loved ones die. But they do not make the connection between these events. between their own unjust acts and their loved ones' suffering. How can these people who are so unjust make any sort of progress, spiritual or other? Because of the things they do, they give the devil rights over them, and as a result, they go through all kinds of troubles, are stuck with illnesses, and so on. And then they come to you and say, "Pray that I get well." Most of the misfortunes that happen to us happen because we have wronged others. For example, when a fortune is made unjustly, the owners may live for a few years like royalty, but then they spend all their money on doctors. Remember the saying, "What is gathered by the wind is also scattered by the wind." Or remember what the Psalm says, "Better is a little that the righteous hath than the abundance of many wicked." Psalm 37, verse 16. What they collect is spent, blown away. Rarely will an illness, a bankruptcy, and so on be sent as a trial from God. If it is from God, then in the end the reward of these persons is usually great. Later they become richer, like the righteous Job. This is also why the bodies of some people, when buried, do not finish decomposing and return to dust. They must have done something unjust. The unjust person is tormented. Unjust people, and in general, all those who wrong their fellow human beings and do not ask for forgiveness, are tormented by their conscience and by the indignation of those they have wronged. When the victims of injustice do not forgive the perpetrators, but groan under the injustice, then the perpetrators will be greatly tormented and suffer. They will not be able to sleep. They will feel as if they are at the mercy of huge waves that crush and twist them around from every side. It's a mystery how the wrongdoer senses this. When we love somebody and think about him in a good way, he knows it. So too, in this case, the victim's anguish and groaning tear the unjust to pieces. It does not matter where he may be, in Australia or in Johannesburg. As long as the person he has treated unfairly is indignant, he cannot find peace. And what happens if someone is insensitive? Do you think that insensitive people do not suffer? The most they can do is seek refuge and entertainment to forget their suffering. The person that has been wronged may have forgiven the perpetrator, but still harbor resentment in his soul. The victim's resentment causes himself pain, but it also torments the wrongdoer who suffers from the victim's indignation. But if the wrongdoer asks for forgiveness, and his victim does not forgive him, then it is only he, the victim, who will suffer. There is no greater fire than that which burns inside the soul. It's the fire of conscience. Unless one repents for the injustices he has committed and makes reparations in this life, his soul will be tortured and eaten away by woodworm in this life and by the sleepless worm in the next. If he has no other way of making amends, he can at least have the right intention in his heart. I remember how one lawyer who had committed many injustices suffered at the end of his life. He had practiced his profession in a province with many stock breeders. Naturally, the stock breeders' flocks would wander into and damage the farmers' crops, and many shepherds would hire this lawyer because he could convince the justice of the peace or the agronomist with his cunning arguments. Not only did the poor farmers rarely find justice for their crops' damage, but they found themselves in trouble with the law instead. Everyone knew this lawyer, and no honest man went near him. This lawyer's manner of practicing his profession even affected how a spiritual father advised a sensitive shepherd who had a small herd and a sheepdog. The dog had given birth to puppies, and the shepherd gave them all away. It happened that one of his ewes had gone missing, leaving behind its baby lamb that was still suckling. With its mother missing, the baby lamb would run after the dog to find nourishment, something that relieved the dog as well. Thus the two animals got used to each other and would seek each other out. As hard as the poor shepherd tried to separate them, they would find each other again. Because the shepherd was a sensitive man, he thought of asking his spiritual father if the lamb's meat would be edible or not. Knowing how poor the shepherd was, the father thought for a while and then said to him, "My son, it is obvious this lamb is not edible, because it was fed on dog's milk. But you know what you should do? Since all the other shepherds bring gifts of lambs and cheese to this certain lawyer, you should bring him this lamb to eat. He is the only one who has a blessing to eat it, since everyone knows what an unjust man he is." Anyway, when this unjust lawyer reached old age, he became bedridden and suffered from nightmares for years and could not sleep. He also had a stroke and could not speak. The spiritual father tried to help him to at least write down his sins. But by that time, he could not write anymore or get his thoughts together. The father was thus forced to read him the blessing of the 7 youths, so that he could at least close his eyes and get some sleep. He even read exorcisms to give him a little peace until finally the man passed away and was laid to rest. Let us pray that God gives him real rest. Yeroda, many people believe that they are under a magician's spell. Is it really possible to put a spell on someone? If a person repents for his sins and goes to confession, such spells are not effective. Witchcraft works when a person is guilty of some injustice. For example, he has harmed someone or deceived a young woman. In this case, he must repent and ask for forgiveness, go to confession, put his spiritual life in order, and restore the wrong he has done. Otherwise, the spell will not go away, even if all the priests in the world were to read an exorcism for him. But even if no witchcraft is involved, the resentment of the soul he has treated unjustly is enough to torment him. There are 2 forms of injustice, material and moral. Material is when we harm another person with regard to material things. Moral injustice is when the wrong is of a moral nature, such as when a man deceives a woman. If she also happens to be an orphan, the burden on the perpetrator's soul is 5-fold. Do you know that bullets seek out immoral people in war? In these situations, you can clearly see the justice and protection of God. There is no room for dishonor in war. A bullet will find its way to an immoral person. Once my company was on its way to replace a battalion. On the way, we got attacked and returned fire. I remember that one man from my company had actually committed a dishonorable act the day before. He had raped a pregnant woman, poor woman. And guess what? He was the only one killed that day. Horrible, isn't it? Afterward, everyone said, "This beast deserved to die." It is especially the devious and cunning who try to escape one way or another that will not be spared. We know from experience that the honest bodies of those who truly believe and live an honest Christian life are protected from enemy fire, more so than if they wore the precious cross. Dear listeners, our show has come to an end. Thank you for listening. We will continue once again where we left off in our next show. Until then, be well.
Readings of Orthodox Spirituality. A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy. Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.